when the international community gives Iran a pass for all of these things, the ballistic missile testing, the arms sales, their support of terrorism, and they look the other way, all in the name of keeping a deal, then you're looking at something that's too big to fail. And that's the problem, is what we're trying to say is just because we all made the deal, just because that was done previously, it doesn't mean you don't go back and look and say, is it still working?
Good morning and welcome to AM Joy. The latest moves by the Trump administration are keeping the planet on edge. This week, Donald Trump made a big show of disavowing the Obama-era deal with Iran that erased sanctions against the country in exchange for limits on its nuclear program, but stopped short of unraveling it, kicking the can to Congress, as Trump tends to do.
We're going to see what happens. We're going to see what they come back with. They may come back with something that's very satisfactory to me. And if they don't, within a very short period of time, I'll terminate the deal.
Meanwhile, there is the looming prospect of nuclear conflict with North Korea, who we have zero diplomatic relations with, and who on Friday renewed their threat to launch ballistic missiles near Guam. And Mr. President, if you're listening to the TV, Guam, like Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, are part of the United States, is part of the United States. It's bad enough that Trump is fighting with Tehran and Pyongyang, but even worse that during this critical moment of world instability, he's also trading barbs with his own Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. And that could lead to a much more dangerous crisis, according to Republican Senator Bob Corker, who said Trump's statements on foreign policy, quote, castrate his Secretary of State, posing a threat to national security. And joining me now is David Frum of The Atlantic, Rosa Brooks, former Pentagon official and author of How Everything Became War and the Military Became Everything, Tales from the Pentagon, Michelle Bernard of the Bernard Center for Women, Politics and Public Policy, and E.J. Dion, Washington Post columnist and co-author of the great new book, One Nation After Trump, along with Gabriel Sherman of Vanity Fair. A power-packed panel. 5 folks here to talk with. I want to start with that castration comment, just because, why not, right? That's the news cycle we're living in right now. And this is the full quote. It's cut one for my producers, and it says, this is from the Washington Post on Friday. As Corker sees it, the biggest problem is that Trump is neutering his chief diplomat, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, thereby inviting binary solutions in which the United States will have to choose between a war with North Korea or Iran capable of threatening the United States with nuclear weapons. You cannot publicly castrate your own Secretary of State without giving yourself a binary choice, Corker said. And this was Rex Tillerson this morning. He was on CNN and was asked about that particular quote, and this is what he said.
He said that the president has, quote, castrated you before the world stage. That's his word, not mine. What's your response to that?
Well, as I indicated earlier, Jake, I think this is an unconventional president. He uses unconventional communication tools. He uses unconventional techniques to motivate change. And for people that have been around Washington a long time, this is a place that you know better than I. You've been here longer than I have. This is not a place that likes to change.
You have a cattle ranch. You don't want to say anything about the senator suggesting you've been gelded before the world, and that's not anything that bothers you?
I checked. I'm fully intact.
I don't have a question. I'm just going to throw this out to whoever would like to respond. Anyone?
Too much information.
Too much information. But, you know, on this point, Rosa, since you did speak up, you know, I mean, the issue is whether or not the Secretary of State actually speaks for the President of the United States. It's actually a serious issue that folks in Qatar would like to know. I'm sure the folks in Iran would like to know.
Joy, nobody speaks for the President of the United States. Nobody. And in fact, Tillerson in an earlier iteration, this is just a few weeks ago, it feels like years ago already, but said precisely that, said the President speaks for himself. You know, I don't, and that was in the context of trying to distance himself from some of Trump's more objectionable comments.
Yeah, absolutely. And Gabe, you wrote a piece in Vanity Fair this week in which Donald Trump is quoted by aides as saying, I hate everyone in the White House. And that in your piece, it said that he is unraveling. And part of that unraveling is the supposed being called a moron by Rex Tillerson, which came supposedly after a meeting in which he said he wanted more nuclear weapons. Is Rex Tillerson at this point fully present as the Secretary of State, or is he just trying to find a way to get out?
Joy, well, that's a great question. I talked to a very senior administration official just in the last several days who referred to Rex Tillerson as, quote, completely checked out. And I think you saw that in his body language in his interview with Jake Tapper. I mean, this is a Secretary of State who's making it very clear that his relationship with the President of the United States possibly is irrevocably damaged. And I think the question for all of us, though, is, you know, the damage in this relationship has serious implications given the stakes of the issues on the table, whether it's the Iran deal or the escalating crisis in North Korea.
Yeah, let's start with Iran. David Trump, I'm going to start with you on Iran. Is there any evidence whatsoever that Iran is not complying with the deal that we made with them?
They are complying with the deal that was made with them. Unfortunately, that deal omitted many of the things that we should care about most. What Iran did with the huge windfall of revenues, maybe almost $100 billion, it received as part of the deal, has been not to invest at home, as was promised by some of the deal supporters, but to massively, radically increase its military budget. And they've become more adventurous, both conventionally on the rampage in Yemen and in Syria, and also with a program of missile testing. So the problem is missiles are not part of the deal. Generally, Iranian behavior outside of its borders is not part of the deal. And so when you see that one of the consequences of the deal has been to empower Iran to act worse in areas not covered by the deal, yeah, technically they're complying with the stuff inside the silo, but all the things outside the silo, which those of us who criticized the deal at the time warned about, those things are going just as badly as we feared in 2015.
But I have to ask this question. I'm going to go back to you quickly on this, Rosa, because isn't it likely then, the logical conclusion I would come to, just as a layperson, would be if they're complying with the deal itself, and then you trash the deal, we decide we're going to cut off the deal, doesn't that encourage Iran to do more missile testing? Because the implication for them, if you're in Tehran, is this country wants to go to war with us. So we'd better have some missiles tested. We'd better actually ramp up our military activity, because this country wants to invade us. They did, after all, under a different president, invade our neighbor.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And I think that on a separate track, you continue to work on the issues that David raised, which are real and which are problems, but don't take apart something that is better than the alternative on the nuclear stuff. And I think one of the things that's really striking to me when you look at Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis, he's someone who has been viewed for many, many years as a hawk on Iran. He takes the issues that David raised incredibly seriously. He also has been one of the strongest voices arguing to President Trump for not scrapping the deal, because the alternative is even worse, and we do have other avenues, both diplomatic and military, to work on the other stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Eat.
Could I say, first of all, let the record show that the good anti-Trump conservative David Trump took a really good right-wing position right here today.
I disagree with David.
And I think the problem with that position is twofold. One, we would like to get a deal with North Korea, and the notion that we make a nuclear deal and then walk away from a deal is not going to help us with North Korea. Secondly, we can't just bust this deal and expect good things to happen. We have a lot of other countries who are our allies who are also on this deal. And David conceded right off the top that Iran is living within the confines of this deal, meaning that they will not have a nuclear weapon for something like 15 years, maybe more. This is a big thing for the United States, for our allies. And if you just bust this deal the way Trump is suggesting, and he really was a little of this and a little of that in this statement, it's a lot of words. We still don't know where this leads. He kicked it to Congress. But if we bust this deal, the consequences inside Iran and whether the forces hostile to the regime have any chance of going forward, we are making things much worse inside.
And let me just read you, and I'm going to go to Michelle in a second. The president of Iran, Hassan Rouhani, issued a statement via Reuters saying no president can revoke an international deal. Iran will continue to respect it as long as it serves our interests, is what he said in a live television address. And I come back to the fact that if you bust a deal they're complying with, it would incentivize them to prepare for war, and it would incentivize North Korea to not ever make a deal with the United States, because we will have demonstrated we won't live with it.
That we won't abide by our agreements. And in no way am I defending, Iran or North Korea, but from the world perspective, you have to imagine that these governments are sitting back and saying, we knew what the Carter Doctrine was. We knew what the Obama Doctrine was. We knew what the Bush Doctrine was. What is the Trump Doctrine? Crazy won't do it. Maybe the Trump Doctrine is castration, since that's the term we're throwing around with foreign heads of state. If we don't know what the Trump Doctrine is, all we know is that he's put, he uses very stark and drastic language. He wants to pull out of deals. He taunts North Korea about the possibility of a war. His own chairman of the Foreign Senate Relations Committee is saying that Donald Trump might lead us into World War III. What incentive then is it for Iran to sit back and say, if you pull out of this deal, we're going to continue to be good world citizens?
David, and then I have a question for you.
If we were dealing with a normal Republican president, what you would
normal is that
you would say the alternative here is not busting up the deal or living with the deal. The alternative, because look, the problem with the deal, and you can't exit the deal the way you entered it, is precisely, and the Obama people designed it so that the benefits to Iran all came up front. The benefits to the United States are phased in gradually over a long period. So we are trapped with this deal because they will still have the $100 billion that they are using to finance their rampage.
That they did also use to finance a war with us, because that's what it looks like is on the table.
We're not here at a court of law. The point is, it is money that they didn't have before.
No, but the president keeps implying that somehow the United States
just
handed over frozen money. I just wanted that clear.
It's frozen. It's a resource for destruction that we were able to withhold from them, and that we have now given them. So what would a normal policy look like? And it would be that you would focus on these. The deal is there, unfortunately. You have to now work within it because they have received the benefits from it, and then you focus on the issues that are immediately present, and you do that by building an international coalition for a new round of new kinds of pressures, both economic and otherwise, to constrain their activity. The problem, of course, with Donald Trump is because he has done this in this kind of impulsive, fitful way, his actions were immediately criticized by the leaders of France, Germany,
and he has no Secretary of State that anybody believes has any credibility with him, because you can't even deal with the Secretary of State.
And one more point, it is before the deal went into effect, before the sanctions bit, the hard sanctions bit in 2012, Iran's most important trading partners included Japan and India. So any U.S. policy has to loop in those two, which means a very ambitious diplomatic effort of a kind that we have been I don't want to use the word that Corker used, but we have been institutionally debilitated from putting it.
We've been gelded by. But let me go back to Gabe really quick.
To have a Secretary of State who has to go on TV and say, I'm still intact.
Exactly. And I think that's the point I want to bring back with Gabe, because here's the issue. If we were having a normal debate with a normal president who proceeded in the ways that David just laid out, that would imply that you had a normal State Department that could then do the diplomacy with other countries. If the Congress decides to go ahead and unleash new sanctions on Iran, we don't know what would happen, but we do know that the State Department is short about a third of its staff, that we are short many of our international ambassadors, that you don't have a Secretary of State that anybody in their right mind believes has any credibility with the White House. And we also have these new reports, Gabe, that Donald Trump is taking his advice on these issues of foreign policy from people like Sean Hannity and Nikki Haley. This was Nikki Haley, who has no foreign policy experience. She was the governor of South Carolina before she got this job. This is Nikki Haley on Meet the Press this morning responding to the Political report that she is Trump's Iran whisperer.
That is just so much drama. I mean, it's all this palace intrigue. What I'll tell you is every member of the NSC works very hard to put options on the table for the president, and we all work very well together. So I am glad to be living in New York just for that reason, is that I don't want to be near the drama and I don't want to be near the gossip.
Gabe, from your reporting, is Donald Trump taking his Iran advice from Nikki Haley and Sean Hannity?
Well, what I do know is that he does speak to Sean Hannity, and yes, he does think very highly of Nikki Haley. She is a name that comes up as a possible replacement for Rex Tillerson. Another name that has surfaced in my reporting is Mike Pompeo at CIA. So this is clearly a position that Donald Trump is eyeing to fill. Everyone I talk to in and around the administration is not holding their breath that Rex Tillerson will be in the job in the long term. So the idea that he would now be turning to outside voices for his Iran policy makes complete sense. And what I think is just striking, I want to touch on real quick, is the way in which Trump has tried to tamp down this conversation that he is losing control of his administration by sending General John Kelly, the chief of staff, out there this week to give a rare on-camera briefing. I mean, that to me, from my sources, fuels the idea that he is trying to quell this talk, when in fact is just validating the idea that he is struggling to deal with all these pressure points, both domestic and internationally.
Yeah, and not only that, but he hasn't replaced John Kelly at Homeland Security, so that if any consequences were to come from his policy, that this country, there'd be no DHS.
I can't bear it if you leave the equation of Nikki Haley with Sean Hannity on the table. That is so outrageous. Nikki Haley, an accomplished governor of an important...
Does she have any foreign policy experience that would make her an Iran whisperer worth
South Carolina is one of the destinations for the largest flows of foreign investment into the United States. She works closely with partners in Europe, NATO partners.
And so you think that she would be perfectly suited?
David's endorsing Nikki
give
Haley
advice.
to replace
As our Iran whisperer.
And unlike Sean Hannity, she's super smart. And
what about the combination?
You let this woman apply her brain for 9 months to the Iran problem, I would listen to her, yes. Whereas Sean Hannity's a different...
Here's the formative word that you just used. She's a her. All right. If she replaces Rex Tillerson and she goes into the Department of State as Secretary of State, we know how Donald Trump looks at women. Is she going to have any more power than Rex Tillerson does? I highly doubt that. I really do. I don't see it happening.
It's not clear from the report, at least from the reporting that we're getting from Gabe.
But I do agree that she's a very smart woman.
Yeah. Maybe you should listen to David Frum. Maybe, I don't know.
The Frum doctorate.
Maybe he'll call you since today you were nicer than you normally are. All right, David Frum and Rosa Brooks, thank you. Michelle, EJ, and Gabe will all be back. Great panel. And coming up, could Donald Trump's tough talk lead us to actual war? Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson joins us just to keep you even more terrified on this Sunday next.
We're going to see what happens with North Korea. That's all I can say. We're going to see what happens. We're totally prepared for numerous things. We are going to see what happens with North Korea. I will say, look, if something can happen where we negotiate, I'm always open to that. But if it's going to be something other than negotiation, believe me, we are ready, more so than we have ever been.
With reports of people around Donald Trump saying he is unraveling and the constant drumbeat of threats and insults aimed at America's adversaries delivered by a tweet or soundbite, even Republicans are now wondering, mostly on background with the reporters, if members of Trump's cabinet would literally tackle him if he tried to launch a nuclear war. So how high is the threat that Trump's actions could lead to actual war? Joining me to help answer that question is Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, former Chief of Staff to Secretary of State Colin Powell. And Colonel Wilkerson, it's always great to talk to you. You know, people I talk to, myself, we wake up with this sort of constant sense of destabilization because it's not clear whether the things that Trump is doing, the things he says, the things he tweets, are just making us feel anxious or whether they actually could pose the threat of real war with either Iran or North Korea. What's your assessment?
I think his purpose, such as it is to make our enemies anxious. But as many of my North or South Korean colleagues said to me recently, both American troops and their families, sponsored and unsponsored, and citizens, they're very worried about what might happen in Korea, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. So Nikki Haley was on Meet the Press this morning, and she was asked about North Korea. She also talked about Iran. This is Nikki Haley this morning talking about that.
The whole reason we're looking at this Iran agreement is because of North Korea. What we're saying now with Iran is don't let it become the next North Korea. So what this says to North Korea is don't expect us to engage in a bad deal. And also, if at any point we do come up with something, expect us to follow through with it. Expect us to hold you accountable. You're not just going to have a free-for-all.
We just had David Frum in the previous panel, who is an opponent of the Iran deal, but who admitted that they are in compliance with the Iran deal. If we were to exit the Iran deal anyway, wouldn't that send the message to Iran that we mean war, and to North Korea, don't make a deal with the United States?
Well, I think my South Carolina colleague there made a grievously in-error statement. The German foreign minister summed it up quite well. He said what Trump has done is make the Iran agreement a domestic plaything. In other words, domestic politics. When you look at Tom Cotton, you look at John McCain, you look at others in the Congress, that's exactly what he's done. And by doing that, he's assured that the nuclear agreement will fail, ultimately. And then what you have is one choice, war. And that's what Tom Cotton, John McCain, bomb Iran, want.
That actually is frightening. So you think that Congress moving to impose new sanctions on a country that is in compliance with a deal that we made with them, that the end game of that is to provoke Iran enough that we can go to war?
Absolutely. I think we're doing the same thing we did in 2003, and believe me, I was very intimate with that process with Iraq. We're marching down the road to war. And as General Zinni said, if you think Iraq was a bad war, wait until you see Iran.
Yeah, and explain for people who don't understand why it would be so much worse than the already catastrophic, mess that we wound up in Iraq.
Well, the first thing you've got is the first visit Trump made was to the country who is, he said yesterday, he said in his remarks, he said Iran is spreading global destruction, chaos. Saudi Arabia is the one doing that. The bloody war in Yemen, which we're sad to say involved in with refueling and targeting intelligence and bombs, is the bloodiest war on the face of the earth right now, the greatest humanitarian disaster since World War II with cholera and starvation. We're part of that. Saudi Arabia at the other end, if you will, is destroying the Gulf Cooperation Council by its feud with Qatar. So the biggest threat in the world right now.
A feud that we've got involved in. We've taken sides against Qatar, who is an ally.
Absolutely. The Saudis are far worse than Iran, and we're getting ready to make that situation even worse, more profoundly destabilizing, by taking on Iran militarily. There's no other choice. If you say it's unacceptable, as Tillerson did, that Iran has a nuclear weapon, you either get it through diplomacy or you get it through war.
And so you have the Iran track, which is frightening because we have this experience of people, as you said, you know, the Iran hawks that are in our United States Senate who seem like they would be very open to and very interested in having war. Then you have the North Korea piece of it, which is completely a wild card. I want to listen to General Barry McCaffrey, who was on MSNBC talking about the North Korea end of things.
I don't want us to take our eye off North Korea. The current language out of the administration, the lack of a diplomatic and serious engagement strategy, in my view, has us sliding toward war by next summer.
I mean, that's terrifying, the idea, because now we're talking about a country with nuclear weapons, with ICBMs that could, in theory, reach the United States.
I agree with you 100%. I think taking our eye off that situation is very dangerous, and I think we have with this Iran agreement negation. Let me tell you something else, too. You probably are aware of this, but we're looking at a bad situation in Venezuela right now. 25,000 plus refugees in Colombia already, and we've got the Turks in Idlib province, and we've got the Iranians and others moving towards that province. We've got a serious situation developing in Syria. I'll look at the camera right now and tell every GI out there, soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, Coast Guardsman, you've had 17 straight years of war. Get ready for 17 more.
Oh, my God. At the same time, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about the other thing. You said in the beginning that in his own ham-handed way, Donald Trump might be trying to send a message to our adversaries that, you know, he means business. But on Russia sanctions, which he reluctantly signed and which he was supposed to begin implementing at the 1st of this month, he is doing nothing. And you have John McCain and others who are saying, why aren't you implementing Russia sanctions?
And Russia and China are down there in Venezuela right now, giving Maduro an out, giving the Venezuelans another course of action. In fact, we might see Citgo, headquartered in Houston, Texas, owned by Russia or China very soon.
This is not good news. It is. Okay. Well, just before I let you go, which should we be the most concerned about open conflict with between Iran and North Korea?
I think the more serious situation by far is Korea and the peninsula, because that is a very serious situation that could cause enormous casualties quickly.
Millions of people dead. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, not uplifting, but certainly instructive. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right. And coming up, Bannon's all-out war, speaking of war, with the GOP establishment. More on that after the break.
Right now, it's a season of war against a GOP establishment. This is not my war. This is our war. And you all didn't start it. The establishment started it. But I will tell you one thing. You all are going to finish it. You know, there's time for mea culpa. You can come to a stick and condemn Senator Corker. And you can come to a microphone, and you can say, I am not going to vote for Mitch McConnell for majority leader.
Donald Trump's former chief strategist, Breitbart's Steve Bannon, used his platform at the annual Values Voter Summit to declare war on the Republican establishment and to deliver an ultimatum to Senate Republicans. Declare your personal loyalty to Donald Trump or face an alt-right primary. Bannon announced his slate of insurgent candidates who could threaten the seats of incumbent Republicans if they don't comply. He calls it the League of Extraordinary Candidates. No, you're not watching the previews to a Marvel movie. And he's targeting senators like Dean Heller, Jeff Flake, and Orrin Hatch, vowing to replace them with candidates like gun-toting 10 Commandments erecting disgraced former Alabama Supreme Court Justice Roy Moore, who beat Trump's pick in the primary for Jeff Sessions' open Senate seat in Alabama, plunging Donald Trump into his latest sullen mood, according to reports. Moore, who again represents Bannon and the so-called alt-right's model perfect candidate, has a habit of saying things like this.
Now we got blacks and whites fighting, reds and yellows fighting, false religions like Islam, who teach that you must worship this way, are completely opposite to what our First Amendment stands for. I believe in the Second Amendment.
Extraordinary simply doesn't begin to cover it. Joining me now, NPR White House reporter Jeff Bennett, former Breitbart media consultant Kurt Bardella, conservative commentator Kirsten Haglund, and National Republican consultant Caton Dawson. My league of extraordinary panelists, because I love the Marvel sound of it. I'm going to go to you first, Kurt, because, you know, there is something sort of juvenile about Bannon. He's up there saying you will declare your fealty to Donald Trump or everybody goes down. They'll take down the entire Republican establishment. And he did create this thing called the League of Extraordinary Candidates, which sounds silly, and it includes essentially trying to replace sort of, you know, typical leaders with people like Eric Prince, the former head of Blackwater, and Roy Moore. Is that something that the Breitbart world wants?
Well, this is something that Steve has certainly wanted for a good long time now, and people forget that back in 2014, before anybody knew who Steve Bannon was, before anybody had heard really of Breitbart News, Steve was trying to do this exact same thing and challenge incumbents in the Republican side across the board in Louisiana, in Mississippi, in Kansas, in Tennessee, and he lost every single one of those because at the time, the thought was, well, this guy's on the fringe, Breitbart's on the fringe, who cares what they really think? They're a bunch of whack jobs, they have no chance. Flash forward 2 years later, everyone in the political universe certainly knows who Steve Bannon is. He's got the Mercer money backing him, which makes him a lot more formidable. It's one thing to just stand up there and bloviate all day. It's another thing to have some real money behind
Bob
you.
and Rebecca Mercer, we should explain, who are the people who bankroll not just Breitbart.com, but Kellyanne Conway, David Bossie, who's the guy behind Citizens United. They are big bankrollers.
They built this entire network of political support and organizations and influencers to try to now activate that to take out these establishment Republicans who they are really putting the blame for lack of Trump's successes in Congress. They're going to put that at the feet of these Republican senators.
And if you want to understand a little bit more about Bob Mercer, Google Bob Mercer racial views. Those will be very interesting for you to read. I can't resist putting up this. This is a Daily Beast piece that talked about this sort of fascination that the Bannon world has with this sort of Marvel Comics theme. This was their deplorables meme that they used during the campaign, which also happened to have appeared on white supremacist websites. Jeff, you know, the race in Alabama, which is what Bannon is hinging his theory that he can get people elected and take people down is based on. But in terms of your reporting, do Republicans on the Hill believe that Luther Strange was going to lose anyway and that Bannon is just taking advantage of it?
Well, that's right. I mean, one of the reasons why Luther Strange lost had to do with things that were specific to that race, right? I mean, it's the case for all special elections. Most Republicans on the Hill that I've talked to say it'll be really difficult for Steve Bannon to replicate that success writ large. Beyond the fact that he endorsed Roy Moore relatively late, after Roy Moore was already leading in the polls.
Right.
And the other thing that's really interesting about this is that Steve Bannon isn't saying that he's going to go after the handful of Republicans who might cause a problem for Donald Trump. He's going after all the Republican incumbents, a lot of whom are reliable votes for the president.
And you know, I'll go to Kirsten first, and I'll go to Caton, because Kirsten, here's the thing, is that if Bannon even had the power to, you know, at a whim, take down members of the United States Senate who are Republicans and replace them with more Judge Roy Moores, wouldn't those just be more no votes like Rand Paul, who prevent anything that Trump wants from getting passed?
Well, I mean, Rand Paul is a libertarian, and so on principle has been divided from the president on many issues. The basic fact is that we don't know what they would look like once they got into Congress. They might, you know, bloviate on the campaign trail and say, I'm going to do this, that, and the other. But as we've seen, as President Trump has gotten in, it's not so easy once you get to Capitol Hill. What Steve Bannon has done really well that the GOP establishment failed to do in 2016 and previously was to talk to people where they are, and that's on social media and use technology. President Obama's campaign was very good at that. Steve Bannon actually referenced that. And the GOP has really fallen way behind. So Steve Bannon and the alt-right stepped in there and really filled the void where there was a vacuum of the Republicans reaching out to the people where they were online, social media. So he doesn't, I mean, yes, he has the Mercer money, but as he said there during that speech, he said, this isn't about the money. This is about you. This is grassroots. This is, you know, you guys are going to take this war to the establishment. So he's really using that kind of language to empower people, to make them feel like they have a voice. I don't agree with it. I think Bannon is just a total danger to the Republican Party and the future of the party. But what he's doing and the methods that he's using, especially technology, are working.
Yeah, I mean, he essentially said, you may not like Obama, but, you know, one of the things he did was he figured out you had to have an authentic candidate. That was what he said. But I want to, you know, ask you this question, Caton, because you've been involved in the Republican Party for a long time, particularly the southern wing of it, which has it has a certain image. And one of the issues is that it lacks diversity. It lacks, you know, racial diversity, ethnic diversity, you know, et cetera. And trying to expand the party after the 2012 loss, the idea was that the party would try to broaden its tent out, that it would try to become a bigger tent party that could attract, let's say, Hispanic voters, et cetera, younger voters, et cetera. But this is Judge Roy Moore. This is just a little soundbite of him at the Values Voters thing on Friday. And I wonder if you think that if he's the template for what Bannon wants in the party, if that expands the party or shrinks it. Here is Judge Roy Moore.
We're seeing a stagnancy in Washington, D.C. Many people are frustrated, and I think that frustration is going to have an effect in the coming 2018 elections. It's not just a swamp, it's a quicksand. And that's what we see in Washington. We don't have leadership, we have followership. For me, it's a question of freedom or slavery. Should I keep back my opinions at such a time as this? I would consider myself guilty of treason toward my country and an act of disloyalty toward the majesty of heaven, which I revere above all earthly kings. We need to make America good again.
That's an interesting way to put it. What do you think? Is Judge Roy Moore the template for what the Republican Party is going to be going forward? Caton.
The day Judge Moore was going to win with or without Steve Bannon. Months earlier, the experts in Alabama told me he had a core base of voters that were going to come out. Republican primaries, and I can tell you firsthand, are not organic items to happen. They're very well organized, they're financed, and it's a small group of people that nominate Republicans to office. Steve Bannon's picked the easiest choice and the easiest target to try to go after to make America great again, which is Republican primaries against senators. Let me tell you, anybody that hangs out and knows U.S. senators, they didn't get there because it was easy. They're not going to be easy to knock off. I get Steve has the Mercers, but some of them have the Adelsons, some of them have the Ricketts, some of them have the Kochs. The thing that some of the people in the party, like myself, who grew up and cut our teeth in the party, are worried about is we're going to civil war with ourselves when we need 8 more senators to enact some of President Trump's policies. Just replacing the ones doesn't give us the numbers to do it. So I think Steve's going to have a really fun time. I don't think he's going to be that successful in building a national coalition, because you don't do that at the top. Lee Atwater, who was much like Steve Bannon but grew up in the party, did it in state houses for redistricting, which has paid its dividends now. That's how you change a political party. Certainly with conservative, maybe the better language is, how about these senators read their platforms back home and stay on message with those? But Washington does have an ability to have to move you around if you want to get anything done.
Yeah, but this is Steve Bannon threatening Mitch McConnell and, you know, trying to refute your point, Caton, saying that he's turned off the money for Mitch McConnell. This is Bannon.
Well, let me tell you about Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell's one of the hardest.
Wait, hold on. Who's going to be Brutus to your Julius Caesar? Yeah, Mitch, the donors are not happy. They've all left you. We've cut your oxygen off, Mitch. Okay?
Is Mitch McConnell likely to take that threat seriously, Caton?
Absolutely not. Mitch McConnell, he's a serious guy. What Steve's missing is we got a Supreme Court justice on our side that changes us for 40 years, courtesy of Mitch McConnell. We've got another 100-something federal judges coming through. courtesy of Mitch McConnell. So one more time, Steve's a little misguided in taking his aim. Plus, most people don't know who Mitch McConnell is. They didn't know who Nancy Pelosi was when we were trying to run commercials with her on TV, and nobody knew who she was. So the average voter that he's trying to get doesn't get all this inside baseball. Certainly talk radio gets it, certainly TV gets it, but it's a lot of bluster. Now, Steve's talented, don't get me wrong, but we're going to, one more time, the Republican Party is going to circle the wagons, we're going to pull our guns out, and we're going to shoot at each other. I'll tell you that Bannon's going to have other people on the other side shooting.
You just scared everybody with the jokes. I want to go over really quick because I want to play one more Steve Bannon site, because at a certain point also people might realize that he's a little weird. This is what he had to say yesterday about the fourth turning.
This is the fourth great turning in American history. We've had the Revolution, we've had the Civil War, we've had the Great Depression and World War II. This is the fourth. And we're going to be one thing. It's going to take 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years to go through this. And we're going to be one thing or the other on the other side of it. We're either going to be the country that was bequeathed to previous generations and to you, or we're going to be something else.
People can Google the fourth turning, but this is a strange person.
He has a very, I think, apocalyptic view of the world right now, and he oftentimes draws from these different historical linchpins to try to justify what he's trying to instigate right now.
Yeah, we're out of time. Very quickly, are Republicans actually afraid of Steve Bannon?
No, and he's stirring up disaffection for Mitch McConnell at a time when President Trump is dumping into the laps of these senators. You know, the Iran deal, the Affordable Care Act, DACA, all
and he admitted he was killing the Affordable Care Act. Tristan, I didn't give you a last words really quickly. Are Republicans concerned that he admitted that Trump purposely tanked the exchanges, or is trying to tank the exchanges? Quickly.
No, Republicans aren't concerned with anything coming out of Steve Bannon's mouth right now, because he has, grandiose views of what he can do. But at the end of the day, I think that you've got moderates and Republicans on Capitol Hill that are like Senator Bob Corker, going to start standing up and finding their courage.
But he called them the leading extraordinary candidates. He has a meme. All right, that's the end of the segment. Jeff Bennett, Kurt Bardella, Kirsten Hagelin, and Kate and Dawson, thank you very much. And coming up in our next hour, Harvey Weinstein gets expelled from the Academy, and Donald Trump is still coming after NFL players who are peacefully protesting. AM Joy. More AM Joy next. This week, a top Democratic donor turned up the heat on Democrats to make the impeachment of Donald Trump a defining issue in the 2018 midterm elections. Billionaire environmentalist Tom Steyer, who has spent tens of millions of dollars supporting Democratic candidates and issues, sent a letter to campaign committees and Democrats in Congress calling on the party to pledge to impeach Trump should they retake Congress in 2018. In his letter, Steyer called Trump a clear and present danger to the Republic and urged candidates to make your position clear so that Democratic voters who are under constant attack by this administration know their elected representatives have the patriotism and the political courage to stand up and take action. And Tom Steyer, founder of Next Gen Climate, is joining me now. Tom, thank you for being here. So you're making it very clear. You're taking the Maxine Waters position. Impeachment should not only be on the table, it should be the campaign theme. What do you say to Democrats who say, if that's our only theme, if it's just Trump must be impeached, we'll lose because we won't have offered something affirmative to voters?
Well, I've never said it should be the only thing, Joy. In fact, I think it's really important that American citizens understand that we're offering a much better, more prosperous, healthier vision for our future. So I've never said that impeaching Trump is the only thing we should stand for. In fact, if it can't be the only thing we stand for, but it has to be one thing that we're absolutely explicit about, because this man is attacking the health and safety of the American people on a daily basis.
What do you think is the most dangerous thing about him that Democrats need to drive home so that the public can focus on a couple of things rather than all the things?
Well, I think the thing that he's done this week is he's gone after the health care of millions of Americans by trying to blow up the Affordable Care Act. So right there you have him deliberately trying to deny affordable health care to millions of Americans with a stroke of a pen, absolutely knowing he's doing it. There is an absolute attack on the health of Americans.
Now, you've given a lot of money to Democrats over the years. You're a big donor. We did a ranking of all the top donors, and you are right up there at the top in terms of the money that you have given. You can see it right there. We've been talking about Harvey Weinstein this week. He's given like $1 million. You've given like $90 million. Are you saying that you will withhold donations from any Democrat who does not essentially pledge to push for the impeachment of Donald Trump if they are elected?
Well, Joy, actually, what our organization, Next Gen America, really does is not to really donate to candidates. What we do is we do grassroots organizing at the local level with partners. So what we're really talking about doing is going into communities with community organizations and either going door to door or phone banking or basically trying to get American citizens to talk to each other about the biggest issues of the day. That's what we've spent our money on, is to try and get old-fashioned democracy back into our political system, because we believe the broadest democracy is the most just and fairest democracy.
Now, one way that you could advance this idea and the ideas that you believe in and that you put your money toward is for you to become a candidate yourself. There's been some rumors that you have an interest in running against Dianne Feinstein, the senior senator from California. Are those rumors true? Are you planning or thinking about running against her?
I haven't ruled it out. What I've said is I want to do whatever I can do that will have the most positive impact. In that case, I would like to know what Senator Feinstein believes about impeachment, whether we can survive without getting rid of this president. And that's what we're asking every Democratic officeholder. We need to stand up and take action about what we can do, because the fact of the matter is we are seeing this president go after the health and safety of Americans every single day in a myriad of ways.
You are there in San Francisco. Nancy Pelosi is the most senior member of Congress on the Democratic side. She represents the San Francisco area. Do you believe that if she became Speaker of the House, she would push to impeach Donald Trump?
First of all, I have a ton of respect and affection for Nancy Pelosi. I really do. I don't pretend to speak for her. I know that Nancy would take an aggressive line towards Donald Trump, and I think that it's absolutely essential that Democrats stand up. This is about going to the American people right now and explaining to them what's at stake, how much of a threat we're under from this man and his companions, and what we can do about it. That is absolutely important for the American people to know right now, that Democrats will stand up and do something, not just passively watch him destroy himself and us with him.
And last question, if Donald Trump is not impeached and survives to run in office to run in 2020 again, would you run against him?
I'd say the same thing about that. First of all, I would do anything I can to try and make sure that our country can go forwards to a better, healthier, more prosperous future. And he is absolutely not only trying to prevent that, he's doing none of the good things. So I would do anything I could to prevent this man from getting reelected.
Tom Steyer, making it very plain. Thank you very much. We really appreciate you being here. Thanks,
Joy. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And up next, the latest on the new allegations against Harvey Weinstein. Stay with us. Welcome back to AM Joy. Harvey Weinstein has been kicked out of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences after the dozens of accusations of sexual harassment and assault prompted a vote from the Academy's Board of Governors to expel him yesterday. The decision came the same day as yet another bombshell report, this one from the Washington Post, which uncovered 3 new allegations against Weinstein of sexual or physical assault, and what the Post claims was a long pattern of violence and abuse. The Post report follows the New York Times, which first broke the news about decades of sexual harassment accusations against Weinstein, and Ronan Farrow's investigative report in The New Yorker that revealed allegations from 13 women, including not only harassment, but also rape and sexual assault. In response to the story, Weinstein's spokesman told The New Yorker, quote, "Any allegations of non-consensual sex are unequivocally denied by Mr. Weinstein, but the previously undisclosed allegations seem to have opened the floodgates as more women women, including some of the biggest names in Hollywood, have broken their silence about their own allegations of unwanted sexual advances from Weinstein. The allegations about Weinstein's behavior cover more than 3 decades, and as noted by Farrow in his report, has been an open secret to many in Hollywood and beyond, which has left those of us in the media doing some real soul searching about why it took so long for that secret to come out. And joining me now, our Time Magazine contributor Jay Newton-Small, MSNBC political analyst Jonathan Alter, and MSNBC contributor Gabe Sherman. And I want to come to you first on this, Jay, because you mentioned while we were in the break that it's not just the Academy. He's also out of BAFTA.
Yep. In fact, it was literally the day after the report came out. BAFTA wasted no time, and they ejected him almost immediately. It was really striking because you would think the Academy took its time, voted, gathered people, thought about it. BAFTA was like, nope, we're done.
Immediately. Yep. And there's new reports out this morning in The Guardian that Scotland Yard is investigating further claims of sexual assault, this time in the UK. The Washington Post story, which is the latest after Ronan's really harrowing, terrific story, and of course the New York Times, which got to the story first. You're talking about somebody whose pattern of neediness, begging, assault, gross behavior goes back so long. And we were as we all think about why then it didn't come out, we were talking before the break about this sort of interrelationship that there is between what we do with the news media and what Hollywood does. You have a best-selling book and you're a journalist, suddenly you have a movie deal or a TV deal. It's all very interrelated, as is the political world with it. Is it just the fact that it's all one interrelated world that people all sort of excuse a powerful man that's moving within all of these circles, even if they know in the back of their mind, yeah, we've heard he's a creep?
Well, I think it partly is that, right? So, and right now those relationships are beginning to break, and I think that that's really interesting, right? So you have Time and CNN used to be partnered with Warner Brothers. That partnership has since been dismantled. Fox News used to be associated with Fox Searchlight. That partnership has now since been dismantled. ABC and Disney are still together. There are still some relationships that exist, but you see the beginning.
We're NBC Universal. We're
NBC Universal.
Yeah,
exactly, exactly. And so, and you see that every year when you have the White House Correspondents' Dinner. You have all of these stars and these movie executives who come in for that dinner, and it's this universe that is very much a unified kind of front of you would think sort of nonfiction, the news, and fiction stories, right? And so it's all these different kinds of creativity in many ways, and that's what's to some degree celebrated, or at least has begun to be celebrated in recent years at that dinner. But I would actually argue that for me, and this was part of what I wrote about in my book, was that I have a chapter on Hollywood, is that
give the name of the book. Yeah, give the name of the book while we're doing promotion.
It's called Broad Influence, How Women Are Changing the Way America Works. But you saw this with Fox News, right? So when women reach a critical mass in any industry, whether it's news, and I know when I started out covering the White House when I was like 22 years old, there was not a critical mass of women covering the White House. But when you begin to reach a critical mass in that somewhere between 20 and 30% in the institution, with Fox, you saw this where it got to the point where women were like, no longer am I going to tolerate this. We're going to come out. We're going to talk about this.
Yeah.
And you see that now with Hollywood. 26% of producers in Hollywood are women, and you begin to see those effects where women are demanding equal pay, like Patricia Arquette at the Oscars, Jennifer Lawrence, and they're also beginning to say this is not acceptable, and I don't want to do this anymore.
They're taking and I mean, the thing is, Gabe, Fox News was brought up, that does bring me to you, Gabe Sherman, because the same thing really happened with Roger Ailes, that you have somebody who's a powerful man that's in the media, you know what I mean, that is in this interrelated world at Fox, who's getting away with this gross behavior, as is Bill O'Reilly. Even after the infamous loofah tape comes out with Bill O'Reilly, he's still doing it and getting away with it, even after settlements. What to you is the tipping point when men in the positions of a Weinstein, of a Roger Ailes, of a Bill O'Reilly, who are in the media, what is the tipping point where fellow members of the media finally can grab onto a story and report it?
Well, I think in the case of Ailes, and I see parallels to this with Weinstein, my book came out in 2014. I included the first on-the-record allegations of sexual harassment against Ailes from women. And notably, Janet Maslin in the New York Times, when she reviewed my book, completely dismissed those allegations. And I think in part because, Roger Ailes in 2014 was still the king of the Republican Party. By 2016, 2 years later, when Gretchen Carlson filed her lawsuit, Ailes's power had begun begun to wane. Rupert Murdoch's 2 adult sons had moved into positions of leadership at the parent company, and they wanted him out of the company. So there was a predicate in place to take those allegations seriously. I see that in the same way with Harvey Weinstein. You know, his company, the Weinstein Company, has been financially struggling in years. We saw a remarkable interview just this week with his brother Bob Weinstein to the Hollywood Reporter, in which he denounced his brother and wanted him out of the company. And so I think we saw a case again that Harvey's fall came at a time when his power and his grip over his industry was starting to decline. And unfortunately, I wish that wasn't the case, where women's allegations would be taken seriously, but it comes in a climate when the accused perpetrator is no longer at the top of the mountain.
And I think that's true of Bill Cosby as well, is that you have, you know, allegations of decades of abuse of women, drugging women, you know, going all the way back to the 1960s. But to your point, when he's Cosby, that's in a position that he's the king of primetime TV, no one necessarily feels brave enough to come out. And journalists, you know, I think about the fact that a Cosby biography was written by a journalist that omitted any even hint of sexual impropriety, and that happened, right? This was a seasoned, smart journalist, and then you had journalists later coming out and regretting that their own, you know, things they were hearing, that they didn't pursue them. This is Courtney Love. I want to go back because there were women, Jonathan Alter, who were in a way trying to get this out, in the same way Hannibal Buress got the Bill Cosby thing out in a comedy routine. This is Courtney Love. She's actually on the red carpet. This is 2005 at a Comedy Central event. Take a look at what she said.
Do you have any advice for a young girl moving to Hollywood? I'll get lively with us.
Harvey Weinstein would like to do a private party in the Four Seasons downtown.
Wow.
That's remarkable. And Courtney Love actually sent out a tweet, I believe this was today, and she said, although I wasn't one of his victims, I was eternally banned by CAA for speaking out against Harvey Weinstein, and she put the hashtag rape. Jonathan Alter, you, like Gabe, are people who are journalists, but who also do work in the TV entertainment side. You with Amazon, you guys have book and movie deals and TV deals. If something like that was said by Courtney Love on a red carpet, and no journalist thought that newsworthy then to pursue, are journalists in a sense clouded by the relationship, and that makes them less likely to say, oh, that's a strange thing, let me dig into it? Do you ever feel like that in a relationship, it makes the journalism more difficult?
Well, first of all, I haven't had any relations with Harvey Weinstein of any kind, just to stipulate that. But before I address your question, Joy, when Courtney Love said, you know, I might get libeled, what she meant was I might get sued.
That's right.
She used the word libeled, but that there might be a lawsuit against her. And both Gabe and I were on the receiving end of threats from Roger Ailes that he would sue us. Very threatening lawyers. You know, I think people who are not in journalism or book writers don't quite get immediately how threatening it is when really high-powered lawyers come at you when you're trying to make inquiries. And Kim Masters had this problem recently and wrote a piece about it today. So it's not just that, you know, journalists want to be buddy-buddy with the executives, the studio executives, so that their screenplay gets turned into a movie. It's partly that they're on the receiving end of real threats, legal threats, if they move forward with their reporting. So it's important for people on the outside not to judge news organizations too harshly about whether they have or have not pursued these things, because these are very difficult stories to put together.
And I just want to, Joy, I want to echo something Jonathan just said. You know, in the case of Harvey, we know that news organizations did look into these allegations very seriously going back years. And I think one of the challenges is that when you have men in such positions of power, whether it's a Weinstein or whether it's an Ailes, women, rightfully and understandably, are terrified to go on the record. And it is very difficult as a reporter, and my standard was in my book, I would not make sexual harassment, I would not air and publish sexual harassment allegations unless the women in question were speaking on the record with their names attached. And that's a very high standard, but given the seriousness of the allegation, I think that's a fair standard to to the subject of my journalism. And if women are terrified to come forward because of the threats and intimidation that people like Ailes and Weinstein enacted, that's a very difficult thing for journalists. We don't have subpoena power. We don't have the power of the state and the law enforcement like, say, a prosecutor would. So we're at the mercy of our sources, and I think that is partly why some of these stories did not come out until now, when women bravely were willing to speak on the record about it.
There's hope for the
and you guys
future.
mentioned Kim Masters. Kim Masters, who was trying to get this story in the 90s. She covered Hollywood for more than 25 years. She apparently approached Harvey Weinstein once and said, "What have you heard about me?" She said, "I heard you rape women." And she couldn't get the story because she actually just didn't have the on-the-record quotes. I want to just really quickly, before I come back to Jay, let's listen to Ronan Farrow. And he talked about that exact issue, about media, about the pressure on journalists who are trying to pursue these stories.
I will say that over many years, many news organizations have circled this story and faced a great deal of pressure in doing so. And there are now reports emerging publicly about the kinds of pressure that news organizations face in this. And that is real. In the course of this reporting, I was threatened with a lawsuit personally by Mr. Weinstein.
Lloyd Grover said the same thing. And Donald Trump, by the way, who's had serial accusations of, similar to Harvey Weinstein, unwanted kissing, unwanted groping, has threatened that he would sue a dozen women. He would sue them into poverty if they tried to come forward. And people are afraid.
And it's also, you have to remember that newsrooms right now have declining budgets, right? Like, we don't have a lot of the legal protection that we used to have even like 10 years ago, where a lot of us aren't owned by billionaires who can afford to do that. And when you're taken on by a billionaire, by somebody like the Hulk Hogan case with Gawker, backed by a billionaire.
Can you explain that really quickly? Peter Thiel, the billionaire, backed the case.
Backed this case because he was angry at the way Gawker had covered him, and so he backed this defamation suit on behalf of Hulk Hogan, the professional wrestler, and basically bankrupted Gawker by forcing them to spend so much money to defend themselves legally. That was a really scary moment, I think, for a lot of people watching the First Amendment, watching sort of news, because it basically said to any billionaire in the world, if you want to just quash any bad news about yourself, you can go ahead and sue that news agency into bankruptcy and make it all just disappear. And I think that there is this emboldened sense by billionaires and by the rich and the powerful that they're going to get away with this, that they can afford to do this, because a lot of newsrooms just don't have the budgets to defend themselves.
They just pay out settlement after settlement after settlement. And, you know, I think that just for the viewers who are listening to this, it will sound probably to a lot of people like excuses. That, you know what, you guys are afraid of getting sued, you know, boo-hoo, right? You should have still caught these guys. These are predators who have been operating for decades. What do you say to people, and I'll just really quickly let everybody answer that question. What do you say to people who say, okay, yes, you face a lot of pressure. Okay, yes, they can sue you. Okay, yes, you need something corroborating, maybe a settlement, maybe something financial. But you know, boo-hoo. These guys were operating for, whether it's Trump, Ailes, Bill Cosby, Harvey Weinstein, Bill O'Reilly, the whole bunch of them are out there, and there are probably more out there. What do you say to people who say these excuses are not good enough for women who are vulnerable? I'll go around. I'll start with you, Jay.
Okay. So, look, I mean, this is. You have to begin to change the culture of an institution, right? And so Hollywood is a place where you have 63% of screen time for women is showing them romantically involved, having them talk about relationships, where 52% of screen time for men shows them working and serious and doing hard jobs. And so you have to really attack that kind of culture. And Gina Davis, an amazing actress, has a great institution in Hollywood where she's begun to ask these questions. Why are there not equal number of extras for women and men? Why are there not, you know, if you're going to have a sponge at the bottom of the sea, why isn't it a woman's sponge, right? So you have to change.
And then when it is a woman, you switch to be a woman, then everybody gets mad on the alt-right. Very quickly, Jonathan Alter, what about people who say all these excuses for journalists letting this happen, if they're hearing rumors about this for decades, aren't good enough?
Well, that's right. We need to do better in the same way with the priests who were abusing children. But after that, interesting things happen. So we don't have that kind of abuse in the Catholic Church anymore. And one of the reasons why is people have used the internet to not feel alone when they've been abused. And so people need to get together online, tell these stories, not just in Hollywood, in the corporate world and across the United States, these stories of these kinds of assaults. And when that happens, the press will get interested.
Yeah, and Gabe, last question to you. Who needs to be less cautious? Is it women who are being victimized? Is it women who are more powerful, who know that their sisters who are just coming into the industry are being victimized? Or is it news organizations that need to just become more aggressive? Maybe, have a fund ready to pursue?
Well, actually, Joy, I feel that the people that are really incumbent to take the lion's share of the responsibility here are the corporate boards, or actually the men. The Weinstein Company board was aware of this behavior years ago and took no action. It's the CEOs, and unfortunately many CEOs are men, who are relying and happy to earn the profits of people like Harvey Weinstein or Ailes and do nothing about it. That's really where the power is, and that's where the culture will change.
This is a great conversation. I really thank you guys for engaging in it with me. Jay Newton-Small and Jonathan Alter, thank you both. Gabe is going to stick around for a little bit. Thank you. More AM Joy after the break.
Is it true? Did you call him a moron?
Jake, as I indicated earlier when I was asked about that, I'm not going to deal with that kind of petty stuff. I mean, this is a town that seems to relish gossip, rumor, innuendo, and they feed on it. They feed on one another in a very destructive way. I don't work that way. I don't deal that way, and I'm just not going to dignify the question. I call the president Mr. President. He and I have a very, very open, frank, and candid relationship.
He could actually just say, no, I didn't call him a moron. Just saying. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson made the Sunday television rounds this morning and once again had to address the report that he did call his boss a moron. And once again, he neither confirmed nor denied the comment, just wouldn't dignify it. Joining me now, Msnbc contributor E.J. Dion, Michelle Bernard, president of the Bernard Center for Women Politics and Public Policy, Vanity Fair special correspondent Gabriel Sherman, and president and founder of the Futuro Media Group, Maria Hinojosa. And Maria, I'm going to you first on this. Wouldn't it have been simpler for Rex Tillerson to say, of course I didn't call the president a moron?
Well, yes, Troy, but you're making an assumption that there's kind of, oh, okay, you guys, we're on the air. I know you saw some heads bouncing back there. You're like, I think that nobody really expects that that's going to happen. But what I'm more concerned about is not that, I mean, we know now what the words were used in regards to the president. I think everybody is just trying to understand how we handle that within the context of whatever is happening internationally, and the fact that what is the strategy of the Trump administration regarding foreign policy? We still don't know. So this is, we can talk all we want about these insults, but the truth is that what I'm thinking about is what exactly is going on behind the scenes that is leading to some kind of policy, regardless of the infighting. And that's where I'm just like, what is the policy? And it's not nationalism, because nationalism, America first, would mean that you're not instigating and looking for places to engage.
Yeah.
So it's quite confusing, and we just don't know who is actually in charge.
Yeah, and America first would mean you were helping Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. I mean,
for example,
not letting Guam be threatened.
Because you're the president of the Virgin Islands, of course.
Yeah, well, the president of the Virgin Islands, he sees him every morning in the mirror.
Every morning.
Every morning in the mirror. I mean, E.J., I'll come to you on this because it is a good question of what is the strategy. Rex Tillerson was asked about the Iran deal, which Donald Trump seems to think he wants to get out of, but it wasn't clear from Tillerson's answer what they really believe collectively as an administration. This is Rex Tillerson on CNN this morning.
It sounds like you agree with that as well, that you would not want Congress to immediately impose sanctions that would end this deal.
No, I do agree with that, and I think the president does as well. That's why he took the decision he took. That look, let's see if we cannot address the flaws in the agreement by staying within the agreement, working with the other signatories.
I don't know how he heard that in Donald Trump saying the agreement is a terrible agreement, he wants out of it.
Well, first of all, let's be clear. If he called him a moron because he'd deny it if he didn't. And I think what's come out in all of the reporting is that an awful lot of people around Trump did not want him to do anything like this. And that this weird statement of his is a compromise where he doesn't just blow up the agreement instantly.
Right.
He's trying to leave something open. And the members of his inner circle, who are seen by many as, the protectors of us against Donald Trump's impulses, are trying to interpret this as generally generously as they can to leaving an opening to keeping the agreement in place. There is just something very odd about a country in a situation where the leading figures in the government feel a need to protect the country from the president they're serving.
Yeah.
And the question is, how long can this go on? At what point do they decide that we can't do this anymore, or this is not functional? I think they're all, for now, going to twist themselves into pretzels to try to stay there to keep things from being much worse.
And there is a gaslighting element of it, that you hear Donald Trump say a thing that sounds destabilizing. Yes. You see him tweet a thing, you can read the tweet, and then you have members of his administration come out and try to reinterpret that so that you didn't hear the thing that terrified you, that you heard something that's normal Republicanese. This is H.R. McMaster talking about this little rocket man business that Donald Trump, with this juvenile thing he has of calling the dictator of North Korea little rocket man. This is McMaster this morning.
Do you and the president proceed from a shared view that the public denigration of another head of state, an attempt at publicly humiliating an adversary on the world stage with a derisive term like little rocket man, that can have some positive strategic impact?
I think what the real danger is in terms of communicating with Kim Jong-un is that if he doesn't understand how serious we are about his behavior and the behavior of the regime. And the president's been very clear on that.
So if you just look at Iran and North Korea, so here's what the president has done. World leaders will question whether there is a Trump doctrine or if this is just another instance of him wanting to eviscerate something that was enacted by Barack Obama. He puts North Korea and Tehran at the top of America's enemies list, which probably soothes their ego. They probably really like to feel that important. But even more importantly, he's put himself in a position where if Congress doesn't do what he wants them to do, if China and Russia don't do what he wants them to do, he doesn't have a choice but to nix it. And he is harming the American public by doing that. I don't think anyone questions, like, do these sunset deals need to be, killed? Yes. Does the Iran's Revolutionary Guard need to be put on the terrorist list? Absolutely, yes. But this is not the way to do it. And his people have to go out and find a way to sort of erase the craziness that comes out of Donald Trump's mouth, and the rest of the country is living in terror. Are we going to be in go to World War III, as Bob Corker thinks he might do?
Yeah. One quick thought on this. What's really remarkable is that this administration will break a record in the number of direct questions asked to its officials that they have to evade.
That's correct.
And you saw that earlier in the Tillerson bites, and then you're seeing that with McMaster. They just try to shift the subject to more congenial ground.
To more conventional ground. And Gabe, I wanted to play Lindsey Graham on that very point, because there is sort of a creation of an unreality that Republicans in Washington seem to be participating in, where they're trying to tell you the reality that you see that seems insane isn't real. Yeah. There's really a normal, stable presidency. There's really a Jeb Bush-style presidency taking place. You're just being distracted by tweets. This is Lindsey Graham talking about golfing with Donald Trump on CBS earlier.
At the end of the day, I played golf with the president yesterday. He is not a man under siege. He beat me again like a drum. We had a good time. He's hell-bent on getting a better deal. He promised to tear it up, and he's decided not to tear it up. He's decided to decertify, which I think he's right to do, and push the world and Congress to get a better deal before it's too late.
Just to be blunt about it, Gabe, are members of the United States Senate and the Congress lying to the American people when they try to present Donald Trump as completely stable, when on background, many of them are telling reporters that he is unraveling?
Well, I think, Joy, this week we saw Bob Corker's remarkable interview with the New York Times break through, and he really said publicly what people very close to the president have been telling reporters like myself privately. And I wrote a piece for Vanity Fair this week that got a lot of attention because it showed the lengths to which Donald Trump's inner circle has grown concerned about his erratic and declining emotional state and his impulsive outbursts. And he, reportedly said to his former chief of security, Keith Schiller, I hate everyone in the White House. I mean, this is a president who is acting like somebody under siege. And so I think what we're seeing are people around in the Republican Party trying to do damage control. We saw General John Kelly, the chief of staff, go out and give a very rare on-camera briefing to try to knock back reports of his combative relationship with the president. So they can do do that. I mean, that is a form of political communication. But as you mentioned, Joy, we all can see it. We see the tweets, we see the discord, we see the chaos, and that is not a substitute. These sort of rosy pictures coming from people like Lindsey Graham are not a substitute for the reality that is visible to the American people.
Let me give the last word to you, Maria Hinojosa. At what point is it required, essentially, that journalists begin to pursue and question whether or not the president is stable? Because we're being told by people like Lindsey Graham that he's perfectly stable, but all of the reporting that we're getting, including from Gabe and others, is the opposite, and there are lives at stake, whether it's war or devastation from hurricanes. Lives are at stake.
Right, and I think that this is a moment for American journalists to start, not to start. Our biggest problem as journalists is that we actually haven't been able to kind of collectively say, let's put a pause on what's happening in the White House and have a conversation about what is the big picture for us, what's the big arc of the story, and how do we understand to not allow this to continue to be normal. It's very hard for us as journalists to have to point a finger and say this is completely insane, and we have to start reporting on whether or not the mental state of the president is stable. But in fact, I mean, I'm still not over Charlottesville, but okay, the other image that I still can't get out of my head right now is the image of the paper towels being thrown at hungry people in Puerto Rico. And so it's just all continues to be shocking, but I'm just concerned that we need to have this bigger arc of what is the end game. And to be clear, it's not going to stop anytime soon. So that's what I'm talking about, the big arc, and asking that question that you're saying. But at the same time, there's a long play here. It's not going to end anytime soon. And it's not normal.
I'm wondering if maybe journalists need to start making these Republicans go on the record. If you're going to say that Donald Trump is unraveling and unstable, maybe we need to make some of them put their names on it. E.J. Dion, Michelle Bernard, Maria Hinojosa, Gabe Sherman, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. And coming up, with so much going on in the country, from storms to wildfires to looming health crises of his own making, Donald Trump can't stop talking about football. That's next.
Before watching a football game, you want to see those players be proud of their country, respect our country, respect our flag, and respect our national anthem. And we think they will. We certainly hope they will.
Donald Trump added more fuel to the national anthem debate this time in his weekly address, just 5 days after Vice President Mike Pence staged a pre-planned walkout during a Colts 49ers game when the players you see here took a knee, a stunt that cost you, the taxpayer, approximately $240,000, according to an estimate by Slate. Despite such opposition from the highest echelons of power and the taxpayer money they're willing to spend to make their point with their antics, and attempts by the right to make the protest about patriotism with a flag, the players sitting out or taking a knee during the anthem seem to be getting their message across. According to a new Huffington Post YouGov poll, 57% of Americans believe the fact that the NFL players are protesting against police violence, up from the 48% who understood that last month. Joining me now is Dave Zirin of The Nation and Edge of Sports podcast, former NFL punter Chris Kluwe, and Colin Allred, a former NFL linebacker and civil rights attorney. Thank you all for being here. Dave, it's been too long. You know, one of the things about this spectacle, the President of the United States lecturing individual Americans, is there's also this threat that he seems to be implying that, you know what, I can take the tax, I can recommend your tax exemptions get taken away, NFL, you will order these players to stand.
Right.
Do you see, you know, just in your journalism looking at this, do you see the NFL passing some sort of a law, a rule, you know, putting it in the rule book that players must stand through the anthem specifically to appease Donald Trump?
Well, they just released a statement this week, a joint statement by Roger Goodell and the NFL and the NFL Players Association saying that they would not do that, that they are going to sit down with the NFLPA and the leading activists in the National Football League, the leading people, the most outspoken people who've been doing this to raise awareness about racial inequality and police violence, and try to figure out a way that, honestly, what I think it's about is trying to leave the players with some dignity while changing the rules, because this is what Donald Trump wants to do. He wants to rob players of their dignity, and that's what this has turned into, particularly on a team like the Dallas Cowboys, where there were no players on the Cowboys who were taking a knee, and then Jerry Jones decides to, in the words of Michael Wilbon at ESPN, treat his team like a plantation. That's Michael Wilbon's words. And then the response by the players, now all of a sudden it's not about racial inequality or police brutality, it's, am I a human being or not? And so this is one of those instances also where I think Donald Trump, and I think he's done it several times in this anthem argument, it has overplayed his hand. Because when he put out a statement saying that Roger Goodell, like, good job, Roger Goodell, changing the rules to require players to stand for the anthem, that hadn't happened yet. And that is actually what triggered the joint statement by the NFL and the NFLPA. And I'll tell you this, I think there are some owners like Jerry Jones who are looking at this from a perspective of, I want to break these players, but for other owners, they're looking at this and trying to find a way out because, you know, black labor power is a hell of a drug.
Yeah, absolutely. And the NFL wouldn't be much without all of these stars. 75% or so of more black. You know, Colin, there is I believe, a Supreme Court ruling that states that schools can't force students to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, right? That actually violates their First Amendment rights. And we know that the NFL is a private business. That if they wanted to pass a rule making players stand to the anthem, they could. They changed the rules in 2009 to make them be out on the field on display. But we're not North Korea. The government can't order you to stand through the national anthem at all. At what point, given the scope of the NFL contract, are players' First Amendment rights being violated when the President of the United States is essentially ordering them to do this public display of patriotism in a country that doesn't require that?
Well, I think their rights are already being violated. I think that the President of the United States is putting pressure on the NFL to do something, to tell them what to do. And I think that in this country, as you said, we don't require certain displays of patriotism. We want to inspire that in each other. We want to make sure that people in this country feel so strongly about this country that they want to stand up and put their hands over their heart. And I think these players are doing a tremendous service by raising some of these issues. And I think that we as Americans should all agree about their right to do that and should be vigilant to make sure that those rights aren't being trampled on.
Yeah, and you had the Green Beret who actually first advised Colin Kaepernick. The irony of all of this, Chris Kluwe, is that when Colin Kaepernick first started his protest, he was actually just sitting on the bench during the anthem. He wasn't actually taking a knee at all. He started doing the taking a knee part after talking to a former Green Beret named Nate Boyer, who came out and just wrote a letter to America. He wrote by ESPN, he wrote this open letter in which he said Colin Kaepernick and President Trump should be the ones uniting our country. Maybe now is a start to heal. It was, it's sort of something I don't think will happen. It's this idea that everybody will kumbaya over it. But it is ironic that the president is on the other side to the Green Beret who came up with this idea of taking a knee.
Yeah, and I think it's something that just goes to show how divisive this president is when the fact is one side of our country is currently engulfed in flames, another side of our country is underwater, and all our president can talk about is a children's game and whether or not these players are offending him by taking a knee, which is something that as an American citizen you are allowed to do. You are allowed to protest your government peacefully. And so the fact that he continues making this an issue when there are far greater issues to deal with really just demonstrates how unfit he is to hold the office of president. I mean, if we had been talking about this with Barack Obama or George W. Bush or Bill Clinton, people would rightfully think that we were insane as a nation. No nation would ever have to put up with something like this and consider itself a first world nation, but yet here we are. And so I think it's very important that the players continue speaking out on this, that they continue protesting for, fair treatment, for an end to discrimination and police brutality, and that we as American citizens follow their lead and address not just this issue, but also the issue of our country as a whole, and that we have a lunatic in control of our country, and we need to change that.
And lost in all of this, of course, is the point of the protest, which is that is black people being killed by police with impunity.
Yeah, and that those numbers are actually up in 2017 relative to 2016. Not that we would know that based on anything that's in the news, but that's what makes that poll that you showed at the start of the segment so important. Like, how is it, given all of the distractions, all of the Pence stunts, all of the Trump bombast, how is it, despite all of that, more people now know what these protests are about? We have to understand that that is a tribute to players like Malcolm Jenkins, like Michael Bennett, the players who have been relentless when they've been interviewed about this to redirect it. Like, I'm speaking to these players, and for them, that's the only thing that's on their mind is the original message. They don't want to get into back and forths with Donald Trump, partly because when they do, it usually results in death threats. Every time Trump speaks about them, I'm telling you this, these players get death threats on themselves and their family, and he takes no accountability for that whatsoever, which is incredibly maddening and, by the way, sociopathic. But the other side of it is that these players, I think, heroically have have been relentless about this. But what we also have to remember, and I'm going to have a piece about this out tomorrow, is that we can't look to these players as if protest is a spectator sport. And this goes to what Chris just said, which is totally true. We can't be sitting on the sideline and be like, yay, they are fighting this fight for us.
Yeah.
That's not how it's going to work. And if we're expecting them to lead it or even create or even be a new civil rights movement, I think we are going to be disappointed.
And Colin, I mean, very quickly, do you see that outside intervention from the civil rights community coming in and sort of working with these players?
I do, and I think some of these players have had help with their messaging, and you've seen that they've stayed on message when they've talked about why they're doing what they're doing. And I think that they've raised awareness around this issue tremendously, and you're right, the rest of us now have to get involved and do the hard work on the ground of carrying out some of the reforms that need to be made. And I know, I'll also say that just in general here in this area where I am, I know that people are just dying for unity, and they're looking for someone to give us a chance to come together. This president continues to divide us, and I think that people are really tired of that.
Yeah, there's not much they can do about it until 2020 unless Congress changes their mind about the way they're behaving. Dave Zirin, Chris Kluwe, Colin Allred, thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Appreciate you guys. And coming up at the top of the hour, the congressman leading the effort to impeach Donald Trump. And a reminder that Casey Hunt's new show, KCDC, premieres tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern on MSNBC. Do not miss it. And up next on AM Joy, a little comic relief. You need it. Now, this is what you call in TV a turn. New York Comic Con was in town last week, and I didn't want to miss out on the fun. I even got the chance to interview the one and only William Shatner, Captain James T. Kirk to you, about his new animated movie, Batman vs. Two-Face, in which Shatner plays the villain battling against Batman, voiced by the late, great Adam West, in the 60s throwback version of the classic comic. But, you know me, I couldn't resist getting political, so I asked the former Starship captain if Donald Trump reminds him of any characters from the early 60s series. Take a look.
Nothing reminds me of what we're dealing with today. There is no history to relate to of what's happening to us today.
Yeah, it is interesting.
We're in free fall.
Wow, the rest of the interview is much less depressing, I promise. And you can catch the whole thing on our Facebook page and on MSNBC.com. And up next, a quick glimpse at the fun that we had at the con. Stay with us.
This is Michael Rooker, and this is Joy, and we're doing her show. So, Joy, tell me, what's it like doing an interview with Michael Rooker?
It is the greatest experience of my entire life. Week in, week out, we here at AM Joy, I don't know they're putting that in there, spend our time mired in the latest political turmoil. So every once in a while, we like to get out and have a little fun. And that's what I did last week when I went to the epic New York Comic Con. Take a look. Hey guys, it's Joy. I'm here at New York Comic Con 2017.
Daywalkers all day, baby.
I grew this in 4 months. I can get the job done.
Let's talk a little bit about Philip K. Dick's Electric Dream. An interesting time to be doing this kind of a project.
What it means to be human, what it means to have empathy and compassion in these times of very little of that. It's very timely.
Excellent costume. Gotta give me one here. Do you think that comics can save our sanity?
I think probably comics have saved a lot of people's sanity over the years.
What is the secret of your power?
Well, the fin works the arrow. And you got to whistle.
Do blue people have more fun?
Always. Blue's the best color in the world.
It is an interesting time to be doing a show that imagines a scary alternate reality. Is it weird to do a show like that when the present reality is also scary?
Well, I think people are very naturally inclined to wondering about alternate realities at the moment, because there was a kind of tipping point a little while ago where the world could have split one way or the other, and it split one way.
Outrage is becoming mundane. Yeah, I think so. I mean, at the moment, there seems to be a new outrage every day, and I think as human beings, you become slightly more numb to it as it goes on.
When people saw it about a year ago, it used to be more like, ha, ha, ha. And now people see it, it's a little more like, oh, that's kind of sad.
Does your gun shoot laser?
No, it shoots ink.
Even better! Is it possible to even depict outrage outrage anymore when people's everyday right now feels a little chaotic?
Well, I guess the frightening thing is there's always something worse and something crazier. So, yeah, the answer is yes.
You want to fight the destruction? Do some creation. It's easy. And, you know, and I'm not saying you got to write some. Grow garden. And I know some people like growing a garden is going to make the world better. Yes, dude, literally. Like, that's the very definition of making the world a better place.
That was fun. We'll be posting my full-length interviews with Sir Davos and all the other fabulous stars I interviewed later in the week on MSNBC.com and on our AM Joy social media pages. And I want to give a big shout-out to my fabulous crew who made this all possible: Xander, Joe, Rob, Alex, Tack, and our very own Time Lord with the purple hair, Lorena. And coming up next, AM Joy. More of it.